All right. Hello, everyone. Give me a mic check as usual, please. I'm gonna test out my mic. If you can hear my voice, okay. Whoever's listening in live, just please give me a thumbs up, emote, or whatever, like we always do. If my voice isn't coming out like it should be, just give me a thumbs down. I will appreciate you greatly if you do this for me. We have to do this every time because once we did a space, um, okay. Okay, that's one, two thumbs up. There you go. Once we did a space, and my sound was really choppy, and I didn't realize it. So, all right. I'm gonna give it 2, 3 minutes for everyone to sort of like trickle in, and then I'm gonna start. Let's talk about today. I'm gonna tell you guys like an interesting story or an experience I guess I had. All right. So I've been meaning to share this for a while. I'm gonna tell you guys about a story when I was far younger. Um, Once I was taken to this very old settlement that's here in the Caucasus Mountains where I live, right? It's a very small sort of like town. It's called Sreta. And this place goes way back. So the existence of this place, they call it the Second Jerusalem, right? So this place goes way back. Um, it has been a continuously inhabited, so it's basically one of the oldest continuously inhabited cities in the world. So not in the region, not in the country, in the world. I feel like it goes back, dates back to like 5,000 BC, right? So that was 5,000 years before Christ. So it's a very ancient place. Um, and in this ancient place, there used to be another city before they renamed it to the current one, right? There used to be another city called Armasi. Um, and in this city, they worshipped a sort of this sort of pagan deity, I guess you could call it. Um, there were two pagan deities. Um, One of them was this large golden statue, and the other one was like a smaller golden statue of a man, right? And for the longest time, these deities were worshipped on those grounds. So even today, if you go there, you can sort of like at least be told in a mythological sense of sort of like where it happened, where this worship took place, and so on and so forth. Mm, it's a very very interesting place. Again, very small town. Um, Nowadays, there's a monastery that's built over it. The monastery is also super old, very ancient. Um, and within this monastery, at least when I visited it, right, um, they have mm, what they call the icon of Saint Veronica. Now, this icon, if you sort of like Google it, it's less of an item or an asset. It's more of a sort of a thing that happens with some certain depictions of saints and of Jesus and so on and so forth, right? And in this particular church or monastery, um, they had this one icon that they called it the blinking Jesus, right? I was like, wait, that's a ridiculous name. Right? What do you mean blinking Jesus, right? And they apparently call it this because when you approach it, right, when you see it, it's a sort of a depiction of Jesus on a cloth of Jesus' face. It's not a painting. It's sort of like not hand painted. It's sort of like if you put like a cloth over someone's face and their face sort of like inks into the cloth. It's that sort of thing, like a Rorschach test, right? That psychologists use. Um, and why they call it the blinking Jesus is because um, where his eyes are supposed to be, um, people have different experiences with it. Meaning, some people see its eyes as closed, other people see its eyes as open, and I was like, back when I was visiting it, I was like, well, how could this be? There's no way this is true, right? Like, there's no way that it's like, things like this don't occur. Like, inanimate objects don't open and close their eyes. Now, obviously, with advancement and knowledge, you sort of determine that these things have a paradoxical way of existing, because it's not always the full truth, like what sort of like the myth or legend says about the thing, and it's not a lie either. And the interesting thing about this thing was when I looked at it, so we stepped into the monastery again. It was a very hot day. So when I looked at the thing, so it's sort of like inside this locker, like this transparent sort of like locker, like this cast. When I looked at it, I was like, um, there's a silhouette of a light, like in the middle of both of his eyes, right, on the icon. But there's also a sort of like a darker silhouette beneath the eyes, almost like showcasing, well, um, as if the eyes are closed, like closed down, because like um, you can see the stuff down there, like the hair and so on and so forth. So I looked at it and I was very unimpressed. I was unimpressed because, like, what anyone could say, either thing is true, and either thing is true, right? Like, either thing could be true. Like, his eyes could be open if you sort of like stare in the middle and sort of see like that little silhouette, which it looks like his eyes are open. But you could also make the argument that his eyes are closed because there's sort of like a darkening on the bottom part. So I was like, it's a sort of a trick of the mind, right? It's almost like, and people had experiences with it when we say, like, when they went to it, and for some people, when they saw it, um, its eyes were closed, and this signified something. So it has sort of like a symbolic meaning of, if you're prepared to commit a sin, or that's what they said or told us. If you're prepared to commit a sin, that you, the eyes would close. And if you were not prepared to commit a sin, if you were striving for purity, the eyes of this icon would open up, or you would see them as open. So many, many years after that, um, and again, like, I'm largely unimpressed by things like this, and you're largely unimpressed by things that you don't understand, right? So many, many years later, only now I understand the meaning of it, right? Like, only now can I sort of like grasp the idea behind it, right? And the idea behind it is, it's not an icon, it's not a picture, it's a mirror, right? It's you see it in the form or the shape as you want to see it, as you see yourself. So if you see yourself as worthy, right, the face of God, the eyes of God will be open to you. And if you see yourself as unworthy, if you expect to see the eyes of God closed, then that's what you will see. So that teaches me, or taught me, I should say, an incredibly potent lesson about, mm, like, spirituality in general, about everything when it comes to seeking the higher mind or the higher self, or seeking things that are sort of beyond this realm. Um, I was so enamored with the idea that it sent me on this sort of like spiral to understand all the things that I might have missed out on, when, because where I come from. It is, um, if not the oldest, possibly the second oldest, maybe after Armenia, um, Christian country, right? There's an incredible tradition of Christianity, ancient Christianity, some even in synthesis with pagan beliefs that existed here before it, right? So like pre-Christian. Um, and it sort of like sent me on this spiral because I always used to rebel against the idea that spirituality was sought in these symbolic acts and rituals and with a certain religious zeal and fervor, right? And back then, back in the day, my life was very sort of like down the drain, so to speak. It was very it was very violent, um, in a sense. Violent in the sense where you could, walk down a street, and if, let's say, if a nice lady was wearing a nice, what's it called, earring or something, nobody cared. Someone could just like run from the other end of the street and just rip the earring off straight off her ear, parts of the ear included. So it was a very brutal time. Um, Here in the Caucasus, conflict and wars and so on and so forth, it happens a little bit differently than most places. There's a certain level of brutality that comes with living and being born and raised here. Um, it's literally known for brutality. If you look at you know Georgia, and if you look at Chechnya and Dagestan, like our whole region is known for war and brutality. But I feel like that is sort of like a smokescreen over what this place really is and sort of like what it represents. And I think it represents an incredibly ancient spiritual and religious tradition, right? And you have to look at it that way wherever you are. So, no doubt where you are right now also holds that ancient tradition. And there are these myths or legends that exist. And I assure you, they exist for a reason, right? There's something to learn from these experiences that might seem trivial, right? There's something to grasp or okay, they're not there just because. So most of the people who are interfacing with it might be interfacing from sort of like a lesser consciousness with lesser understanding, as I were, right? When I first experienced it, like I said, I was largely unimpressed. I didn't feel the divinity or holiness or whatever of the place, but that was because divinity and holiness, I couldn't feel it in myself. Right? It wasn't in me. So how could I conjure it up in the external world if it's not within me, right? It's the same with the faces of people, right? The faces of people, they're also sort of icons, right? And they're also sort of portals to other dimensions of thought and other dimensions of understanding and holiness and divinity. Every person, right? Um, Even the ones that you don't like, even the ones that don't like you, whatever. And the moment I understood that was the moment I started viewing people like that, right? There's sort of like a symbolic meaning or magic to them or who they are and how they behave and what they do and yada yada. And it takes a certain preparedness to really understand the meaning behind it. Like it takes a certain mindset and a mental clarity to really move forward with the sort of like the spiritual lessons that you're imparted. So my sort of understanding of what is a human face, or what is, let's say, physiognomy, or when you look at someone, you're sort of like looking at their essence, right? And their essence, very much like the face of God, it opens and closes to you, right? You either make itself, it either makes itself open to you, or it makes itself not open to you. But it's not up to it, so to speak. It's sort of like up to you and your preparedness to receive the full symbolic meaning of what that entails. And it's strange to say that, right? It's a strange thing to say that. Well, if every face is the face of God, like is the face of, people who are not good people, or let's say they don't live in a virtuous sense, at least how we understand what virtuousness means, right? Like, are they also? And you know, the the short answer to that, I think, is yes. And the long answer to that is, while that is true at its core, they also are mirrors, right? And they sort of show you with their face, with their icon, they're showing you what they see the world to be. It's almost like a walking confession, right? The face is a walking confession. And they're showing you, this is how I view the world, right? So if is there aggression or hatred or whatever on my face, this is how I see the world. I see it as hateful and spiteful and aggressive and so on and so forth. Is there sadness or sorrow or sort of like a melancholic type of thing going on? That's how I see it. I see it as sorrowful and sad and melancholic. Is there pride or sort of like a bias or judgment on my face? That's how I see it. I see the world as sort of like prideful, whatever. Is there happiness and joy? I see the world as happy and joyful. But there are some things in the world that, when you see it, I almost feel like it's very difficult to come back from it. And because it's so difficult to come back from it, it sort of like imprints on your physiognomy for good, because it becomes a part of the identity of who you are or who you were. So if you look at someone and who has a sort of an imprint, or sort of like a deviation of, like, let's say they used to be angry for a very long time, right? Um, and because they were angry for a very long time, their brows sort of like smushed in, and sort of they developed like this strange, I don't even know what to call it, almost like a leaning towards that emotion, and that emotion is sort of like imprinted on their face. Mm, can that be made better? And I'll tell you, can that be reverted? Most likely not. But it can be made better. And it can be made better by contrast, right? And this is where contrast comes in, and attraction and ugliness. A lot of people send me their sort of like pictures, and they're they have this like strange anxiety with it, and the sentiment comes off, and that, like, like, consider myself, not the most, attractive person, and I feel ugly, and right. A lot of people, like, when they send in like physiognomy readings, I feel like they want to showcase the best of themselves, right? Because there's a certain anxiety that comes with, like, well, what you're going to hear, and what do I want to hear about my physiognomy, right? I want to hear good things. Um, and most of the pictures that I get sent in are very. It's almost like they're professionally taken, right? It just shows the best parts of you, that type of thing, and I understand that. I understand that pursuit. Um, and then sometimes I get a picture, and someone's just, in their bedroom, whatever. It's just like super casual. Um, and we all want to be seen in our most positive light, right? Like we all want to for the world to sort of compliment us, right? But the truth is, hiding those parts of you that you don't like or you no longer like and you just like it before, blah blah. They don't really change much. Well, you might change how people perceive you, like on the outside world, but they don't really change much in the sense of like inner work. But how you do change that is by introducing contrast. So if I'm someone who has an imprint or disposition to be angry, right, or someone who's easily angered, and in contrast, I act very harmonious, right, and very gentle and sort of like peaceful, that creates a new kind of charm, right? That sort of like balances it out. So if you bring your imprint into balance, like in a physiognomy sense, um, not only will that return you to sort of like the point of neutrality that you begun with, right? That you started with, but it will upgrade that further because um, if you start climbing a mountain from a certain point and then you climb the mountain and you descend back to that same point, right? You are where you previously stood, definitely. You haven't moved much, right? But at the same time, you have gone on a journey and you have moved quite a bit, and you're not the same person that sort of like started that journey, right? Um, climbing the mountain is very difficult, right? It's something that irritates you. It's sort of like a hardship. Reaching the peak is very joyful and pleasurable, right? Surely that will be imprinted on your physiognomy. And then climbing back down is sort of like a harmonious journey. It's still difficult, but it's a harmonious journey because you know the worst is behind you and you have this feeling of heading home, right? Mm. So sort of like that's what I mean, where if you introduce contrast and imprint that contrast over long periods of time over the things that you don't like or the things that defined you in the past that you no longer want them to define you, people will read into that. People will notice that, like intuitively, of course. Like they're not going to read it in a formulaic sense, but they will understand that, okay, like this is a person who's been through a lot, yet so on and so forth. Mm, I really want people to think about that when they think about um, spiritual living and becoming better. Like for example, right? Um, in my comments right now, I have a lot of people, right, who are sort of like baiting me into argument, right? Um, and this is because of um a numerology post I did, right? And I said, you know what? I'm following my own advice, and I want to make it quiet. So here's non-participation. I don't want any piece of it, right? Now, if I had been myself, let's say several years ago, my reaction to it would have been completely different, right? I would have probably been more spiteful or vengeful or whatever, um, disagreeable, confrontational, whatever. But the idea of spiritual progress is to be able to leave the things that you no longer vibe with behind you. Like, regardless whether they tickle sort of like the rougher parts of you or not, right? Now, me, I wasn't always, let's say, the most non-temperamental person. And I'm sure none of you were or are, depending on where you are. Mm. And there's a certain thrill to it, right? There's a certain thrill to being dangerous and um, dominant and so on and so forth. But all of those things, because of all of those things, because you know you are all of these things, right? When you step into that, when you step into that monastery, right? It's all of those things that have you thinking that you're not worthy of seeing the eyes of God. You're not worthy of looking into the eyes of the Creator because you feel like wherever they are, whoever they are, they wouldn't be proud of you because you are not proud of yourself because you can't be proud of yourself. There are certain things that are keeping you from truly, like deep down, realizing that not only have you changed, not only have you made progress, spiritual progress, I mean, but there's a feeling of unworthiness. And that feeling of unworthiness to me is far worse than anything that can come out of, let's say, someone feeling like they got one over me, or them having sort of like a little victory, or them winning an argument, or anything like that. That feeling of unworthiness is something I don't want to return back to because you know what that is for me. It's like when you start climbing the mountain, like we said, and then you fall back down to where you were. It's a completely different experience, right? So when I say non-participation, let's say, that's what I mean. Because you will always get this invitation from the world, especially when you're advancing spiritually. You will always get like this temptation or invitation. Hey, remember this? Come back down, like remember all of these things that you felt and all this dopamine rush and so on and so forth. None of that matters. All of that is bait, right? So then you realize over time, like, when people, let's say, in different religions and sort of like mystical schools, when they talk about the idea of temptation, you sort of like get a new idea of, well, what that temptation is and how it unfolds, right? That's sort of like the meaning behind the temptation is yourself almost dragging itself behind to what it was before. So that thing that you didn't like or enjoy about yourself. And I'll tell you right now, today, if I went back there and looked at that same, I don't know what I would see. I don't know what I would see. Would I see, would I be able to stare into the eyes of God or not? I have no clue. And probably neither do you, or maybe you do. When we talk about, so I spoke to a few people yesterday, right? When we talk about, you know, formulaic sciences, astrology, whatever, numerology, whatever, they're very interesting. Okay, you can't say that they're not. They're very interesting. Um, and they sort of give you this sense that everything follows a rule set, and that this rule set can be exploited or something along those lines. And for all we know, it can. Fine. Okay. But it doesn't address the primary goal and the primary point of spiritual advancement. And the primary point of spiritual advancement is not to gain material benefit from it. It is to gain just enough, right? It's not to gain like the idea of it is like, oh, like I became spiritual and now I'm rich. There's other ways of getting richer. You don't have to be spiritual to get rich, right? You can go and I don't know, like hire an astrology person or a numerologist, or nowadays you can just go and ask Chat GPT. It'll answer most of your astrology or numerology questions better than most experts. It's true because it has that database. It has access to that database. And you can go and you can sort of like get into the corporate world and sort of like, oh, have this moment and rise up and oh, like, I'm so rich and I'm so materially like it doesn't fucking matter because what happens at the end of this journey, right? What happens at the end of the journey is basically the same as staring that icon in the eyes. But instead of the icon, now it's your higher self. It's your highest potential, right? You see what you could have been, what you could have made of yourself, and what you are. And the passage to the next level after that is about, well, am I fine with how I did? Am I fine with how I did? So it's not like there's some, malicious or malevolent force that decides like whether you're worthy of standing before God or getting into heaven or whatever. It's your own higher mind first. That is the first layer of your quote unquote judgment, right? So first you have to pass through the hall of mirrors to even get to where you're going. But how can you pass through a hall of mirrors if everything you see reminds you of who and what you are? How can you pass through the hall of mirrors if you don't like what you see? And this our life and whatever comes after it, this our life is a hall of mirrors because the world gives you, it shows you what you are. That icon in that monastery, right? It just symbolizes that journey. So when you look at the icon and you're like, well, are the eyes closed or are the eyes open? That's what it's trying to show you. That when you see yourself in the mirror, do you see yourself as worthy or unworthy? And it'll keep repeating the same thing to you over and over, over and over, over and over. That's what our life is. And sometimes it'll show you angles of yourself that you don't like. Or sometimes it'll show you angles of yourself that you did not like before and see how you react to it. So the mirror itself isn't malicious. Get it? It doesn't have an agenda, but any sort of maliciousness that you might have lives within you. So when you like deep down, just before you go to sleep, right? There's this moment of clarity that you get. You sort of leave your body and there's a moment of forgetfulness between wakefulness and sleep, right? When your body is dormant but your spirit is still sort of there. And for a moment you forget who you are. You forget your name, you forget what you look like, you forget what you did today. Nothing like all of these things that seem important now suddenly lose their importance. And in that moment, like deep down, when you're left with your very essence, this is why we ask people, how can you sleep at night? Right? Meaning that when you are drawn out of your body and have to come face to face with the essence of who you are, right? Is that something worthy of being looked at? Me personally, I got into spirituality to remove myself from the things that I did not want myself to become, right? but to also face those things. Right. So now when people tell me, "Oh, like you should, go in and argue and prove your point and y- whatever," I don't care about proving any points to anyone because there's nothing to prove. There's nothing to contend for. Me winning or losing literally changes nothing. It literally changes nothing. It just changes the makeup of, okay, like how I feel in this particular moment. Do I feel like a winner or do I feel like a loser? Do I feel like I'm winning or I'm not winning? But I don't want to exist on that thin, narrow branch of self-worth, right? And I don't think anyone should. I don't think you should either. But that's up to you to decide, right? It's all just like a strange thing when you really understand what spirituality is about. You lose most of sort of like this fervor and like this awe that comes with it, right? When I see a bad player, right? And when I intuit something about them, I'll just say it like it is. But I don't have to prove anything to anyone. Everyone can make up their own mind. Me, I haven't changed mine, but I'm not going to sit here and try to change yours, right? I don't need to. I don't have to. I have the luxury of removing myself from the situation whenever I want. I have the luxury of choosing who I want to be associated with and who I don't want to be associated with. I have the luxury of picking and choosing who I want to provide entertainment for or not. I have the luxury of choosing between being vengeful and hateful and dangerous, which I can be, or not vibing with any of those things anymore. I can choose it, and so can you. And when you understand this, the things that tempt you to fall back into your lesser state, which is most likely your past state, they will melt away like last winter's snow if you just choose to let them be. Because the nature of truth is beyond debate and argument. It's beyond winning and losing. It's beyond domineering and not and whatever, whatever. The nature of truth is that it just is. It just exists. It's out there. And it's uncontested, right? And regardless of which angle you look at it from, regardless of where you are in your pursuit of said truth, eventually, through days or months or years or lifetimes, you will go and find yourself face to face with that truth. You will know it fully. You will comprehend it fully. Eventually, that's like the eventual destiny of every person. Period. Even if their soul is literally sucked up into the void and then rebirthed again, where the universe like shits it out back into the world after several hundreds of reincarnative cycles or whatever, that's the destiny. So eventually they'll get there, and I know that they'll eventually get there. So it's like if you speak about it from a point beyond time, they already know the truth, right? Like their higher mind, their future potential, already knows what the truth is. There's no use arguing for it. I want you to think about today if you stepped into that monastery, as I did when I was young and gullible and naive, blah, blah. When I was in a different state of mind, meaning, you know, violence and aggression and death all around and bullets flying, really think to yourself, what do you think, like, what do you expect? Like, do you think the eyes of God would be open to you or not? Do you feel like you would think yourself worthy? Because it takes a lot of self worth, right? To step in there and, when and say the cup or the glass is half full and not half empty. Me, I don't know what I would say. I have no clue. But I like to think that the glass is half full. I like to think that.